Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for it. I need a chair. I get very, very nervous when I have to stand up in front of a relatively small audience. If there was 1,000 of you, I could do it, but not like this. So I was down at ChatGPT this morning, and it doesn't know why 11 is called 11. Why is 11 called 11? Yes, I do. I Is it the movie? You wake up 11. Excellent. Escape velocity. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, I get it. 11-ish meters. No, no, no. That's great. I thought it was the movie Spinal Tap. You watch Spinal Tap? Yeah, yes. Amazing. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I get to come tell my favorite story in the world, which is about Google Maps. And also, I'm wearing my Canva shirt. Do you guys know Canva? Yeah, I'm wearing my Canva shirt because all my Google Maps T-shirts are well, past the wearable age. But I think Canva is actually maybe a more interesting lesson, slightly more recent. But so Google Maps. By the way, I'm from Denmark. I live in Athens, so we're neighbors. Did anyone come to Panathenea? Yes. You'll come to Panathenea. I'll try and squeeze that in the end of my talk. But that's my current project to build the world's greatest innovation festival right here in your region. And it's super exciting. Look, Google Maps. You have to think back in time here. Like, does anyone even remember from before ChatGPT launched? Back when, barely, right? Like back when computers couldn't even talk to you. It's like you have to go even further back, like the iPhone hadn't launched yet. We're talking that far back. Like back when the web was just transitioning from a document browsing sort of thing to an application platform. I see a few people with gray hair like myself, so that you must remember the dot-com bubble. Yeah, so yeah, so we're in the late 90s. I was doing a PhD at UC Berkeley in California, and everyone was leaving academia, building startups that became billion-dollar companies without revenue, and it was super frothy, and the NASDAQ was going through the roof. And I left. I graduated, and I left, and a professor down the hall was starting a startup. I joined. My brother came over from Denmark. We joined, and this startup was doing forward error correction. Won't get into that, but we raised $42 million in many rounds without ever producing a product that sold. That was how crazy the times were. And 5 years into this, the bubble burst. We were unable to raise money. The company almost died, but laid off everyone. Myself first, my brother a little bit later, and no, the other way around. He's the smart one. He got laid off first. And when I got my pink slip, he called me up and he said, Lars, we're going to work on maps. Has anyone ever used MapQuest? So MapQuest was the dominant mapping site 25 years ago. They were the pioneers, and it was a web page with a bunch of text, and it had a little map on it. And if you wanted to move the map, you had to reload the entire page, and it would like give you a different map, and it would take a couple of minutes. And still, it was one of the most popular websites on the internet. And Yahoo was still a big player, and Microsoft, who had a big popular website back then, they had copied this thing. And my brother said, look, we can do this much better. In fact, most of my conversations with my brother starts like this. He says, online mapping sucks. He's a college dropout, by the way, the smart one. I have a PhD, right? And I'm like, but I use it almost every week. I go, I find my address, it prints out driving directions, it's awesome. And my brother's like, no, it sucks. And then he argued that we should make the map bigger, faster, prettier. And in particular, he argued that all the information should not be in text around a static map, but we should have a dynamic map filling up the screen, and then information should be put on top of the map. And he had some super simple ways of doing this. Although one particular technical feature of it was he argued that web browsers were just stupid and a fad, and that we should write the proper C++ application you would download to make the maps faster and so on. And so when I tell this story, I remember being immediately sold. When he tells the story, it took me days to realize his genius. But in either case, since we've both been laid off, we set out to write some code. And we didn't have any money, so we were convinced, like everyone, that we were going to be billionaires in the dot-com bubble, right? And so we had saved up zero money, and so I had to rent a room in a shared house in Berkeley, and my brother had to move all the way back to Denmark, moved in with mom. He hates this part of the story. And then we set out to write some code, and 6 months in, we thought we had a pretty good prototype. Super fast maps, very slick. Like, you have to install an application next to your web browser, and then you got these super fast maps. And now by then, the mood in the valley, and tech in general, was like deep in the dungeons. Hello. And and everyone was talking about how shitty things were. And so we heard that there was going to be a panel discussion, sort of about this size here, with a panel of investors talking about how shitty everything was. And one of the investors was this guy who'd been on the board of the startup that laid us off. And we thought he might be into our maps, right? So we crashed the party, couldn't afford the ticket, right? And there was indeed a panel of investors talking about how shitty things were. They tried to make the point that that was a great time to start a new company because office chairs were dirt cheap at the time. I'm not making this up. And so we sat through this thing. We went up to Frank and we said, "Hey, Frank, remember us?" He remembered us, and we have this maps thing. Do you want to see it? He said yes. We took an hour of his time. We showed him a demo. He thought it was pretty cool. He also was no longer investing, of course. He was an angel investor. This is what I do now. And he had lost all of his money. And he said, "I'm not going to invest myself, but I do know some VCs in the Valley." So he made 5 introductions to venture firms in the Valley, and they did take the meetings, and we rocked up and we showed the demo. We're now 6 months into this journey, and we didn't even get a no. Like, we got 0 even callbacks. No one even answered. And it was quite depressing. And then, look, I often give talks, in particular to young people, about how you shouldn't give up. And in this case, I have to be honest, we were giving up. We're like, this is just not working. Like, we had no money to pay ourselves. We were completely broke. No one wanted to talk to us. But also no one was hiring, right? Because the bubble had burst and the NASDAQ was crashing, like lost 80% of its value. Everyone was getting laid off. No one was hiring, and so we might as well continue. And so we continued. We tried to get some friends involved, but we didn't have money to pay them. And by the way, we heard over and over and over when we showed our maps to people, we heard over and over the following: yes, your maps are much better than the existing maps, but nobody cares. Nobody cares. You can't make money from this. Nobody cares. We heard this over and over and over. Just give up. Because what had happened was that MapQuest had sold itself to AOL. You guys remember AOL? Huge player back then, 25 years ago. And they bought it for more than $1 billion, and then never recovered that money, and all the team had left, and which is also why the area was so, the area of mapping was so stale. And so we couldn't get anyone involved until suddenly this friend of ours in Australia, of all places, long story, he was like, "I'll help." He'd also been laid off, right? And he was working in a gas station. And I have a mate who's really good. He'd also gotten laid off. He was working in his dad's clothes cutting factory. Like, we were world-class programmers here. So we flew down to Australia on the cheapest flight we could find, right? And my friend had a spare bedroom in his apartment, so we set up shop in his spare bedroom. We wanted the URL of our maps to be bedroom.com, but that was taken for some reason. And so we kept coding. Now we were 4, right? So we're coding, and the prototype got better, and it got better. And now we're maybe like a year and a bit into the journey. We thought, okay, we're going to go back to the Valley. Went back to the Valley, found Frank, and we're like, "Hey, Frank, remember us?" He still remembered us. Look how our demo is so much better now. And he said, "Yeah, that is kind of better." And then he made another 5 introductions to us. And now it became clear that these were 5 kind of better introductions, right? So like 11 is the big dog of this region, right? And so the VCs we had talked to first were kind of the smaller firms, and now we're like talking to the bigger firms. And also the mood was getting a little better. Like, now the crash was kind of a year and a half behind us, and people were starting to realize that the world still existed. And we went and we demoed it again 5 times, right? And this time we got 1 callback from one of the really big firms in the Valley. And they were like, this could be interesting, come back. And so we're going to call this firm Big Dog. It doesn't matter their name, but they're still around and still one of the top firms in the world. And they had like helped start Google and Apple and Yahoo, and they were a really big deal. And they call us back, and they very famously had this model where they had 12 partners, and they only made one investment a month, and it had to be by consensus. I always picture this sort of round table with men in armor arguing over startups. And so you had to show the demo to each of the partners, right? And they were busy, so they like showed up one at a time. So we kept going back. We did a demo, and then we waited for the call, and they're like, yeah, come in and do partner number 4. And we developed this theory that every time we went to demo, there'd be a new partner plus an old partner who had seen the demo before. And so we made sure that every demo there was at least one new feature to get the old partner to go, ooh, that's new. Right, and so we actually kind of like held back some features so that we could do that and give them the impression that we were moving at the speed of light. And I think that worked. And sort of 5 or 6 partners into this is one guy, one of the old partners, right, that had seen it before. He came into the room, he sat on the table, he leaned over and he said, we want to invest in your company. And we want to invest $2 million for 40% of your company. Right, and like everyone here will realize that that's the shittiest deal ever. Right, but in year 2001, this was amazing, and like we were like ecstatic, right? That Big Dog was going to invest $2 million in our company, and so we kept going back and we kept demoing, right? And this number stayed firm, and we got a lawyer. So I don't know if this happens here. I don't think it happens in Greece, right? But in Silicon Valley, you can go to a lawyer and say, "Hey, Big Dog is interested," and then they'll work for free, and only get paid if you actually raised the round. And so we got a lawyer, and this guy helped us negotiate the terms around these big numbers. Right? And we had this conversation with him. We're like, hey, can we somehow get a better deal? And he said, and you guys all know this, right? There's exactly one way to get a better deal, which is to get other investors interested. And we're like, how do we do that? We've demoed it 10 times, and these guys are the only ones interested. And he said, well, look, here's how it works. Right? So you're talking to the big dogs. Right, and if the smaller firms find out that Big Dog is interested, they will want to co-invest, and maybe you can help this, right? And he says, and I know where they go for their drinks, and I can just go and spread the rumor for you. Just let me know. And so we were not bold enough. Like, you're supposed to, of course, not tell anyone. That we hadn't signed anything, but there was, a confidentiality clause in this term sheet we were starting to draft. And then we went back to the partner at Big Dog, and we said, hey, our lawyer says that if we spread the rumor that you're interested, then everyone else will come, and then you have to pay us more. What do you think? And the guy laughed, and he said, yeah, we're familiar with this concept. He said, we call it the blessing of Big Dog VC. And it totally works, and we're fine with it. Look, if you want, do it. And he said, I'm just going to warn you that there's also a curse of Big Dog VC, which is that we haven't invested yet, right? And if we don't, you will find it very difficult to explain to those other smaller firms that really only came because of us. Make up your mind. And so we're like, let's do it, right? So we went and told our lawyer, go to the bar, get drunk, tell everyone, that it's super top secret that Big Dog wants to invest in this Danish mapping firm. And he did, and then for like about a week, we were like the hottest ticket in town, right? And VCs came at us right, left, and center, and argued passionately why we needed them on our cap table, and it felt great. So what happened was we actually another habit we developed in all these meetings with Big Dog was that whenever we were done, we would ask, they'd now assigned a partner to be our shepherd through this process, right? And we'd ask this guy, where are we in your funnel? Like, I don't know if you track this carefully, right? But these guys got thousands of applications every year, and then they went through this funnel, and then they did one investment a month, right? And he knew exactly where we were in the funnel every time we had a meeting. And by now, we had done all the partner meetings. We were starting to draft a term sheet with our lawyer. And I asked him, look, once we've signed this term sheet, where are we in your funnel? And he said, you're at the 70% mark, which surprised me, Like, I didn't know anything, right? And he said, even after the term sheet, we only actually do investing in 7 of the 10 companies that we signed term sheets with. And I said, really, what happens? And he said, well, in 1 out of 10 cases, during due diligence, we find something that the entrepreneur misrepresented, and then we never talk to them again, right? And this we knew was not going to happen, so we're like, okay, we're at 80% then. What happens in the other 2 cases? And he says, well, we do this. Like, we have a big portfolio, including some very mature companies now, and we go and have casual conversations with them. I'm sure in the same bar that our lawyer used to spread the rumors, right? But we go and have casual conversations about your space. And then often we discover that one of the bigger companies in our portfolios, they have something brewing in your space. And then we tend not to invest. And it's for 2 reasons. One is that we don't really like to have competing companies in our portfolio. I don't know how you think of this. Different VCs have different ideas about this. But also, it might mean that the window of opportunity is shorter than it looks like. And then we don't invest. And we're like, okay, well, this we cannot do anything about, right? And so we finished the negotiations around the terms, and all these other companies came in, and honestly, they were completely unable to move any numbers, right? They just wanted a seat at the table. And so I think if it had happened, it would have probably just been Big Dog anyway, who, by the way, are the best. I love them, and whenever I get a chance to work with them, I try that out. And what happened is this. The day before we were scheduled to come sign the term sheet, Yahoo, who was still a big player, hadn't touched their map site for like 4 years. They launched a small change to their map site. It was nothing like what we were proposing, but it was still something, right? And I did see it, and I'm like, And then we got a call from Big Dog, our favorite partner there, and he's like, hey, Lars, did you see what Yahoo did? I did see that. And he said, look, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but the deal is off. And I can still feel that pain, but the deal was like off. Because remember the 12 partners and consensus, right? And of course, it only took one of them to go, yeah, the window just closed. Deal's off, right? And here's another lesson I believe I learned here. I'm sure you've all experienced this, right? That when you deal with an organization of any kind, whether it's a VC thinking to invest in your startup or it's a big potential customer, organizations don't have uniform opinions, right? The people that work there have a range of opinions for or against the deal. The ones you talk to are always the ones that favor the deal. Because the ones that don't favor the deal, they have other things to spend their time on. And so you tend to get a skewed impression of how close you are to making the deal because you talk to the bullish people, right? And in fact, we never found out who had killed the deal or why. I mean, we kind of knew why, right? But we never got a chance to even talk to this person. It was just like off. And our friendly partner, they have had this experience many times because they're a consensus model, right? He's just like, look, Lars, I know this hurts, but there's nothing that can be done. It's over. And so you know, we hung up, and we were, by the way, like broke by now, right? We'd done some contracting gigs to make some money. We cashed out all our credit cards. Like my brother had even sold this little pension he had for like 50 cents on the dollar, and we were like broke. And so I called my mom in Denmark in tears. This happened. And mom says, look, it's because there's something better waiting for you out there. Moms are really good at this stuff. And then we took a few days to recover, right? We didn't drive any motorized vehicles in those 3 days. And then we decided, look, let's find the 3 people who have been the most bullish about our technology, and asked them for advice, right? And so we called Frank, and we're like, hey, dude, this happened. And he's like, well, Big Dog does not change their mind. That's over, forget it, right? And he had some ideas that we should go sell our prototype to a real estate company because they need maps, and that wasn't super interesting. And then we called the partner at Big Dog, and we're like, look, we know the deal is out, but can you give us some advice at least? What should we do? And he said, look, to be honest, I really like what you're doing, and I could probably get like $500,000 together, a bit from myself, like angel type money. And let me know if you want this. I think you can probably honestly do better if you just like plug it, keep plugging. And then there was this one other guy So he was someone that Big Dog had introduced us to, who was not a partner, but he worked with them. I think it was an LP. And he was going to put in a little bit of his own money, and then he was going to be our independent board member, right? And he was going to work half a day a week on the business development, because my team was all engineers. We were just 4 of us, right? And this guy, Ram Sharam, we had just demoed it to him for 1 hour, and he seemed to like it, right? He was into it, and then so we called him as well. And Ram, he gave me what became the most impactful bit of business advice I've ever received in my life, right? He said, look, it's easy. He said, the same reason that Big Dog doesn't want to invest is going to make Google want to buy you. Because they also saw that Yahoo was rumbling in the map space. Google had nothing. Like, Google was just search back then. Gmail hasn't even launched yet, nothing. It was just like search, right? And they have seen this too. And Google loves an opportunity to leapfrog. So if they buy you and combine your cool ideas with their massive infrastructure, right, they get to leapfrog Yahoo, who was a big competitor of Google back then. They also had a search engine, right? And they will love this. And Ram conveniently sat on Google's board, and so that was, useful. And and in fact, if you look at everything that happened, including meeting this guy who then did introduce us to Larry Page, right? If you trace the introductions back, everything, good and bad, goes back to Frank, right? So we had 1 million people who had told us, no one cares about maps, you can't make money from maps, we don't want. And so there's one guy got interested enough that he started making introductions, and you look at that tree, right? Frank made it all happen. And so my advice often to young entrepreneurs, you got to find your Frank. And as an angel investor, of course, I try to be the Frank in other entrepreneurs' lives. And in fact, Canva, if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about Canva, but Canva has actually published this tree. It's beautiful, since they're good at design, right? And their Frank, his name is Bill, and he's a good friend of mine. And I'm kind of in the second level of the tree, and I have a quite nice subtree below me. And so find your Frank. That's the lesson here, right? And so we accepted Ram's idea. 3 days later, we're sitting in front of Larry Page demonstrating our maps. And I don't know if you ever had a chance to either interact with Larry or see him speak, but he's a man of very few words and even fewer facial expressions. So he sat through this entire hour-long demo and basically said nothing until the very end. And then he said, remember how Google Maps, well, we didn't call it that yet, of course, right? We had some, it was called where to technologies, where the 2 was a number, so super clever. And and he's like, and it was a C++ application that you would install next to a web browser, and that's how it was so fast. And Larry was like, look, I like the way you think about maps as a platform, but Google is really a web company. Are you sure you can't do something like that in a web browser? And then he dropped the mic and walked out the door. And he brought another person from the corp dev team in, Megan Smith, by the way. So I don't know if that rings a bell, but she later became the CTO for Obama's administration. Super cool. And so she came in, and we went home. And then the next 3 weeks were the most productive 3 weeks of our lives. We were in what I like to call a heightened state of motivation, completely broke, without any other options in the world than trying to impress Larry. It was that or death, right? And so this entire theory we had kind of developed the company on, that web browsers were just not powerful enough to do maps better. And the theory was that the reason that the 3 existing map sites in the US were so identical was just the technical limitations of web browsers in 2001 or 2, right? And then we went and really dug in to browsers. And back then, Internet Explorer was still king. And there was a corner of Microsoft of crazy people who had invented this thing they called dynamic HTML, which was this idea that JavaScript in a browser could manipulate the HTML after you had loaded it. And there was this blog by a guy called the DHTML Dude that explained this stuff. And then I was like, let's try that out, right? And then in 3 weeks, we completely disproved one of the core theories of our startup by writing essentially the same client in a browser. And like, of course, this was possible because our C++ application was very thin, right? All the heavy lifting did happen on our server. And so we rewrote our client 3 weeks, and we blew our own mind, to be honest, that suddenly we were looking at what became Google Maps, right? A draggable map in the browser. You didn't have to install any extensions. You could put maps, put stuff on top of it. And we rocked back to Google 3 weeks later, and they'd now assembled a big team, like maybe half the size of this team of Googlers rocked up. And we're just like casually going, hey, so Larry, do you mean something like this? And Larry was like, yeah. And then we impressed them enough that they agreed pretty much on this spot. We were going to buy you. And then we worked out the details with Megan. And I'm not allowed to share the number with you, but you can imagine my negotiating position, right? The introduction from Ram was like, hey, there's these 2 Danish brothers that you've never heard of, that no one will invest in. Do you want to, buy them? And so the negotiator was a very low number, right? So like MapQuest, $1 billion plus. Against as Lars' little thing, not the $1 billion plus, weighs $1 billion plus, right? I'm not bitter about this in any way. It really did change our lives. But it was a very small number. And we did this mock negotiation with Megan because we knew we couldn't move this number. And we're just like, look, there is no way we're going to sell you our company unless we can be Lars at google.com and Jens at google.com. That's our email addresses, or else the deal is off. And it was a joke, right? But Megan actually went and reserved those emails for us. And very shortly after, they bought a much bigger company where the founder was also called Lars. He hates me still to this day. And I gotta say, Lars at google.com played really well on the dating sites back then. Not that I was into dating sites or anything. Just joking. And so we joined Google. How much time do I have? A little bit. We should leave some time for questions too. So we actually we then experienced this thing that nothing happened, right? They had agreed. We agreed on terms. We did sign a term sheet, and then nothing happened. And it was terrifying, right? Because we'd just been through this thing with Big Dog, and they just didn't call. And we were like, hey, what's going on? And they were stalling, and nothing was happening. And then there was this sort of drumbeat in the press of rumors that Google was about to go public, and they just weren't talking to us. And of course, what was happening, we learned later, right, that all their deal people were busy building what became the biggest IPO of its time, right? And this little 4-person company was just like not getting onto the radar. And then suddenly we got this call from Megan, and she's like, guys, I can't tell you anything, but you have to come work for us on Monday. Like we don't have time to buy your company, but you have to accept employment office for us on Monday, and I can't tell you why. And so we went to our lawyer, same guy, right? And we're like, and the lawyer says, absolutely not. That's the craziest thing ever. Like, if you accept employment and I haven't bought your company, your IP is going to seep in there. And what if they don't buy it? Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And so we thankfully ignored our lawyer, and we rocked up that Monday, right? And so the deal was that, and it was a big part of our deal was like there were some shares for the company, some Google shares for the company, but there was also really nice employment packages with substantial option, right? And by coming that Monday, we got the price was locked in at the pre-IPO price, and that actually turned out to make a huge difference. And then we rocked up, and like 2 days later, they announced the IPO, right? And then they did the IPO, and then months and months later, they did in fact buy our company. And to their credit, there were some things in the term sheet once it got down to actually constructing the deal that was a little vague and unclear. And every time they interpreted it greatly in our favor, just to make sure there wasn't going to be any tension there. And we spent 6 months turning Where2 maps into Google Maps. I mean, essentially the only thing missing was servers and backends. And we actually, back then we had to license the data for the maps, and we didn't have money for this. And so we had made this deal with one of the providers of this sort of data. They typically made car navigation systems. We had borrowed a square mile of mapping data around our house in Berkeley. And so all our demos was like, the world is a square mile around our house in Berkeley. And so we bought we licensed the rest of it. We got a bunch of servers, we launched it, and it became quite a thing very quickly. Like even on the first day we launched, it became this thing. In fact, we thought once we had it all ready to go, we figured we'll make it live on maps.google.com without telling anyone, so we can do a real end-to-end test before we announce it, right? And no one will notice. And there were no links anywhere on Google to maps.google.com, right? And so we did that the day before. And within like half an hour, the world went crazy about Google Maps. So it turned out that there was such attention on Google that some person, blogger, had decided sooner or later Google is going to launch a map site. That's just going to happen. And it's probably going to be on maps.google.com. So he had a robot pinging that URL. And when we made it live, that robot went, and so he blogged about it. And he's like, I'm the first to announce to the world that Google Maps has finally launched. And then everyone in, so we got like millions of users before we had even like announced it. It was that crazy, right? And the next day when we then did announce it and put a link on the homepage to it, we got so much traffic. I think like 14 million users, something came to check it out. And the bandwidth usage was intense, right? Remember Google at the time now, they had sort of launched Gmail, but in beta, so the numbers are very small. But Google search uses very little bandwidth, right? There's 1,000 computers computes the result, and then you get this text page back, right? But Google Maps was like sending all of these images of maps, and it was so much that we almost destroyed Google search that day. And there was this guy in a data center with a big red button, kill Google Maps if it gets any more popular that day. Anyway, so it was tons of fun, lots more to tell. I think it's by far my biggest success, obviously. And yeah, it was great. And did you guys use Google Maps to come here? Yeah, good. No one got lost? Because I always this says more about me. Whenever I see an empty chair, I'm like, did they get lost? Was it my fault? Did I do that? But all right, super cool. So we have a little bit more time, right? I'll just go through a few things I've done since then. So we actually, when we were done with Maps, my brother and I, we stayed on the team. This was kind of by design. We decided we stayed on the team until the day that Google Maps became the biggest mapping site in the world. It took a couple of years. And then we left, and my brother had these other ideas. Did anyone ever try Google Wave? Yeah, that's what I thought. Google Wave, yeah, no. So after Google Maps, now we're kind of in a different position, right? So like when we negotiated selling our mapping thing to Google, we had 0 negotiating position. But when we were done with that, and my brother had yet another idea, same conversation, email sucks. I use it 10,000 times a day. What do you mean it sucks? Like, it sucks, and we're going to make it much better like this and this and this. And so that was our next project. And we went to Google and we said, hey, we have this thing. We're going to change email like we changed mapping. And we're kind of thinking to leave and do it as a startup unless. And so that was quite a nice negotiation. And Google really wanted us to stay and do it at Google. And they threw, they gave us 25 million worth of stuff, office space, all the support, 60 engineers, anything we wanted, crazy resources, right? And we did this insanely ambitious thing. And then we fell into a trap called the second system syndrome, very hard to say. Second systems, so you have a big success, right? But that success was kind of built with chewing gum and safety pins and rubber bands, right? And hacked up. And then you're like, the next thing we do is going to be perfect, right? And we have all these reasons we're going to make it perfect. And it turns out that that's kind of hard to do off the bat. And the counter argument is often attributed to Sergey Brin, the other founder of Google, that scarcity leads to clarity. And it's one of the reasons a lot of new innovations come from startups. I think that when you're so strapped for resources, you really have to focus on the core value proposition. You literally have no time or resource to do anything else, right? You get to really perfect that and test it out. And then once that's up and running, you can do all the other stuff. Like, so Google Maps, we launched with a team of like 6, 7 people. Google had added a few to my team of 4, and almost no money spent throughout this entire thing, right? But since then, Google has invested tens of billions. It's a team of 20,000 people. It's a crazy, massive operation. Of course, part of it is that Google now does its own data. It's no longer licensed data. Another fun story. But so we built this thing, and it just completely failed. And painfully, our demo was really good. And so when we first showed our demo, we first showed it to kind of all of Google. Google was now, you know, a 3,000 person company. We did this big internal demo, and everyone at Google like stood up and gave us a standing applause. And like it's hard to get geeks to stand up under any circumstances, right? But to stand up and applause. And then Google invited us to announce this at Google I/O, their big keynote thing, right? And so we were at the biggest convention center in San Francisco. 5,000 geeks assembled in front of me. We did this 1.5 hour long demo, which by the way is on YouTube now. It's been watched 12 million times. It's 1.5 hours long. Like if you count minutes, my internet fame is like Justin Bieber style fame, not quite. But also there at Moscone when we showed the demo, 5,000 people stood up and applauded us. And we thought we were going to be the hottest thing around. And then we launched it, and it completely failed. Very painful story. We don't have time to tell the painful story. I'm so sorry. But it was super painful. And I think, in fact, the only time, well, the first time, and hopefully the only time I'd really like experience what depression feels like. I don't know if you've had this fun experience where you're in such a dark spot that like you're physically incapable of moving. It didn't last very long, but it was really quite terrible. And then what happened is that, you know, I left Google, but we had assembled an insanely talented team inside Google. This all happened in Australia, by the way. But we'd assembled this crazy good team. And I have now as an investor, when there was a 60-person team and the 15 top performers there, I have this list of these guys, and whenever they go and help start a startup, if I get a chance to invest, I invest, and that's actually been quite a lucrative and successful theory. And in particular, what happened was right as I left Google, that guy Bill at the top of the Canva tree, he reached out to me. He's a kite surfer. Any kite surfers in the room? Yes. 3. Okay, we're gonna fix that. Just kidding. So he's a kite surfing techie, and he organizes these cool networking events where techies, investors, entrepreneurs are into kite surfing. They meet on a cool beach somewhere in the world, and then they kite and they do deals and they talk tech. And one of the world's finest kite beaches is outside of Perth in Australia. Perth is like a 2 million person city in Western Australia, mining country. Right, not known for its tech startup scenes at all, but he went and they kited there, and then people heard they were in town, and this young couple, Mel and Cliff, who were still students, they rocked up. There's this adorable picture where Bill is like in his board shorts, right, and Mel and Cliff rock up in suits that were clearly borrowed because not quite of the right size, and they pitch him this thing, and Bill kind of liked it, right, but they had something missing, like they didn't have a tech team. So Mel's a graphics designer, Cliff. So these are the 2 first founders out of 3. He was a business student, but they managed to really like impress Bill with their passion, their vision. And he called me up and he's like, Lars, I met these kids in Perth, and man, they have something. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something about them that just really makes me want to back them. But they don't have a tech team. And since you happen to have just left Google and there's a killer team that you built, can't you like help them, right? And so he wrote this email to Melanie, who, by the way, got 200 VCs turned her down in the course. So by then it was like 25 or so, but in the next year or so, another 150 turned her down. And Bill was like, help them get a tech team. And he wrote to her, if Lars signs off on your tech team, I will invest. And that was the closest she'd gotten to a yes from any investor. And so she had every incentive in the world to hound me down, which she did. In the span of a year, and over that year we actually managed to get 2 of the guys from my team, the Wave team, to join her. So Cameron Adams became the 3rd co-founder. He's now the CPO, and Dave Herndon, he's their CTO, right? And that set the bar crazy high, and her entire first round came from that crazy kite surfing network, right? And that was a $50 billion company down in Australia. I'm actually going to go hang out with them for South by in Sydney in a few weeks. I haven't seen them because of the pandemic forever. And so that was a great way of recovering from that shitty thing, right? And then actually what happened was when they started taking off, this was my 2nd ever angel investment, small check. And then he started really taking off, and I'm like, wow, I'm also good at investing. And then, that was the theory I quickly disproved, right? And I started cutting checks left, right, and center, and many of those I lost them like embarrassingly quickly. But so now that's kind of what I do, and I think I have a more measured approach. We have maybe a handful of other unicorns that we've helped seed, that look promising, right? But I have one of those portfolio that's like 100 companies, right? And 98% of the unrealized gain is Canva. But we have reached a stage now, which I'm very proud of, that Canva is starting to do like annual secondary sales, small annual secondary sales, and so since a couple of years ago, all the money that we invest is returns from our early portfolio, which is a great place to be in. And then I rocked up to Sydney. No, it's not Sydney. Athens, the other most beautiful city in the world. My wife is Greek. Is a Greek goddess. My daughter is a Greek goddess in training right now, and I want to be a Greek something. And we rocked up there 4 years ago during the pandemic, maybe 5 years ago now. During the pandemic, with very low expectations. I have to be honest, very low expectations about there being anything resembling a tech ecosystem there. And the reason for this is that we had visited in 2012 when our older daughter graduated from high school. I was between projects. I worked at Facebook now, and we went to see, could we make Athens our home, right? And actually, I gave a TEDx talk, which you can find, TEDx Athens. You can find it online. It's the best talk I ever gave because my wife wrote most of the script, and it's kind of filled with Greek jokes that I didn't get, and so it's a fun thing to tell jokes you don't understand, and the audience like roars with laughter, and then we try to make the case actually, because remember, my own Google Maps success started during an economic crisis in tech, right? And so I try to argue to the Greeks, who were at the depth of an intense economic crisis. I think it hit here pretty hard too, right? That now is actually a good time to become an entrepreneur because people are more willing to take risks since no one's hiring, work for equity, that kind of thing. And then we toured the ecosystem of Athens in 2012, and that was a very short tour. And a thing we observed in particular was that the mood of the young people there was deeply depressed, right? And I do believe that to be a successful entrepreneur, you need optimism and like borderline pathological optimism even, right? And I think actually when I look at the European landscape, I think the biggest missing ingredients for being a successful and building trillion-dollar companies is really a matter of confidence and mentality and can-do attitude. Like I think there is tons we should not at all learn from America, but the one thing I think we should pick up is this idea that of course we can. Of course we can build the big, and this was the thing that Mel and Cliff had, right? They came out of this mining town in Western Australia, and they were like, of course we can build the biggest, actually Mel in particular had this plan, we're going to build the biggest, most valuable company in the world, and then we're going to give all the money away to solve poverty. And I said, you mean the biggest design company in the world, right? And she said, no, of course not. I mean, the biggest, most valuable company in the world. And whenever they give an update, now they're like 50 billion market cap. They're like, okay, so let's see, how far are we into to meet our goal, right? So the biggest company is 4 trillion. We're at 50 billion. So yeah, we're 2% into our journey, 2.5% into our journey. Let's get back to work. That's how they think, right? And it's really working. And the other thing, by the way, with Canva is like back then, all of online design or digital design was ruled by one company called Adobe. And I did ask, which also created kind of a vacuum. Like we had experience in the mapping, right? No one was working on maps because no one had made money from it, but no one was working on design because Adobe was its monopoly. And I did tell her when she was like, we're going to change everything. I said, have you heard of Adobe? I asked Melanie, and she's like, yeah, they suck. I'm hearing my brother again, I'm like, it's just the worst. And then she explained her story was that as a student, she made her pocket money by teaching people to use Adobe tools. And her students in her like afternoon classes, they were not designers like her, right? They were the owner of a hair salon in Perth who couldn't afford a graphics designer to design the flyer in her window, right? And so they came to Melanie, and it took them 6 months to learn enough Adobe skills that they could barely make a flyer for the window. And Melanie was like, sucks, and I'm gonna make it so that it's 5 seconds to me, and then she has, right? So where is all this coming from? Yes, so that's why we didn't move to Greece in 2012. And then during the pandemic, when New York was a madhouse, on a whim, we decided, let's go to Greece. And by then we had a portfolio sort of spread out around the world. And we always in the wrong time zone anyway, so let's be in a sunny, wrong time zone. So we moved there, didn't ever expect to do any investments locally, right? And then we rocked up, and there was this one startup we'd heard about that did metabolic testing equipment. And we were kind of into fitness. And so we invited them over in a backyard, masked up, social distancing, and they pitched, and we thought it was kind of cool. So we invested in this company, and then word got out really quickly that there was this new angel investing couple in town, right? Every startup raising money came to us, and we were like, wow, there's a lot of stuff happening in Athens, right? And we started meeting investors, and it really blew my mind that from nothing, this still young ecosystem had emerged, like, 30 active VCs. I know you guys are active in Athens too, right? And some really cool startups. Some of them suffering a little from this mentality thing where people are like, we're going to do a missing thing in this region. We have invested in a few things like this, and we think that's fine, right? But what really attracts us is, I'm going to build the biggest, the first, the best in the world. And so we invested in a company that I think might be the first to solve Alzheimer's. A biotech company out of a little lab on the beach in Athens, and like a company that makes a 3D printer that prints with human tissue. I also thought that sounded crazy, but they're going to be the first to get a surgical procedure approved with a machine like this that can construct you a new bladder. So you guys are way too young to be worrying about this, right? But when you get a generation above me, bladder cancer happens quite a lot, and the bladder comes out, and you live, and it's great, but you get this nasty bag on the side of your body. That's a big drop in your quality of life. And this company can make you a new bladder with a 3D printer, which is mad. And then we did think, I'm forgetting the whole question thing. We did think, once we made like 10 investments in Greece, we were like, how can we help, not just with individual startups, but like help the whole ecosystem? And this is how the idea of starting an international innovation festival came up, because we looked at Lisbon and Helsinki, also emerging markets, but well ahead of Athens. And we interviewed everyone who would talk to us, like, how did you do this? Why are you so far ahead of us? And both cities gave credit to their international tech festivals, like Web Summit in Lisbon, 75,000 people come from all over the world. Helsinki, slush, 25,000 at the height of it, comes from all over the world. And they explain that two things happen when you're able to. When you're a small emerging market, you can host a big international festival. Two things happen. One is that the national conversation on the news becomes all about entrepreneurship for 1 or 2 weeks, right? The president, the PM, they come, stand on stage, all the television stations are running, and the whole country hears all of these fantastic stories of entrepreneurial success, and it helps shift the mindset of a population towards entrepreneurship. And then the other thing is, a lot of foreigners come through town, and although they don't come to see Portuguese or Finnish tech, right? They come to meet all the other foreigners that come to meet all the other foreigners, right? But when you're there, you get to see, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? And remember my experience that I had zero expectations of Athens, and it kind of blew my mind with how much is happening and also how fast it's growing. I would say, like, this region is probably the fastest growing tech ecosystem in Europe, right? It's not the biggest, and it's easier to grow when you're small, right? But I think if we can all work together, putting a big international festival in Athens, we think of it as belonging to the whole region, right? I think it can really help accelerate our growth, right? And I think Athens in Greece has a unique potential to build, actually, I think, the world's biggest and most important innovation festival. And it's of course not because the ecosystem is particularly big. In fact, it's one of the smallest of any capital city in Europe. It is very fast growing, right? But Greece has this intensely valuable bit of history in Panathenea. Right, so you all know that the Olympic Games, biggest sporting festival by far in the world, is a modern version of a very popular ancient Greek sporting festival. So it turns out that ancient Greece had a really popular startup festival called Panathenea. Happened every 4 years in Athens. People came from all over the Greek world, which was huge back then, right? It was basically the world. and they competed in craftsmanship and engineering and mathematics and poetry and music, in theater. They had boat races and chariot races and foot races. Like, they competed in everything with the explicit objective of improving the future, of pushing forward human excellence. And in the end, they had a massive party, like a day-long celebration in honor of the goddess Athena, who's a patron god of the city. She's the goddess of wisdom. It's her temple that still sits. It's a bit of a ruin. I keep telling the Greeks, you should really repair that thing. Don't quote me on that. They are very sensitive about this question, right? But it's still there and it's breathtaking. And everyone loves to come to Greece anyway for their vacation, right? So Greece is one of the few countries that host more people every year, foreigners, than they have citizens. And by a factor of 4, like 4 visitors come to Greece for every Greek citizen every year. And so they have the infrastructure, they have the skills, they have hospitality, and it's going to be amazing. And we adopted the Finnish model, so it's a nonprofit. It's run entirely by students, and we just started in December. So we had 5 months to build the first year event, and we set crazy ambitious goal. Right? We're going to get 2,000 people to come the first year, unheard of. We're going to have a meaningful amount of them come from outside the country not to speak, but just to participate. It's going to be that good that people will buy an airplane ticket to come to this thing, right? And our young team, 5 full-time organizers, all in the early 20s, they like blew through all of the goals. And some of you were there, right? So like we got more than 3,000 people came. We had to turn away at least 500 people after we shut off the ticket sales. The energy was like electric. The Canva founders came, of course, good friends, but we had like Kesha, famous American rock star, Naomi Harris, a famous British actress came. We had people from OpenAI, from DeepMind, from Hugging Face, from 11 Labs. But the energy, like the people, when you guys came, right, like the energy was just intense. And we're going to try and make it 5 times better next year now that we have a whole year to organize it, right? And we've doubled the team in size. And I think in 5 years, Panathenea is going to be the world's top innovation festival, and I think it's going to help the whole region, like to grow, right? And I would love, actually, I don't know if this is logistically possible, but things like this, when the big prominent VCs in the region have their founders' weekends, could that possibly be done right next to Panathenea? Hint, we'll help. We'll find you super cool venues, so you can go and do this amazing bonding experience in the afternoon, but in the morning you go to Panathenea. We actually carefully constructed it so that Panathenea's main events only happens from 9 till 2. And then we encourage everyone to go spread out throughout the city and do more targeted side events. And Venture Friends, do you work with Venture Friends? So they did this. It was a prototype, right? So they have an annual founders weekend like this. And they moved it. It's easier. They're already in Athens, right? But they moved it to be during Panathenea, and I think it was very enjoyable. Okay, now I talk way too much. I was going to only talk for half an hour, but I'm having too much fun. Are there any questions?
Do you guys have any questions? Mitko first, and then Jean-Philippe.
Lars, thank you for sharing your story. Based on your lived experience, now as you invest, what do you look for in companies and founders?
Yeah, well, I look for people that look just like my brother and Melanie. It's like this. First the mission has to be interesting, and so but we don't have like a thesis of what we're interested in, but it has to like jive with us. And so there are actually areas that we don't invest in, not because it's not lucrative, but because for some reason it doesn't jive, like fintech. I've not made any fintech investments. That's a lie. I just made my first fintech investment, but it just like money just doesn't interest me that much. As I'm more into like tools like Google Maps and Google Wave and Canva and so on. But so typically, and this is very much an angel investor thing, right? It's more fun to invest in things where you feel like you have some personal attachment to the subject matter, right? And then, of course, it has to sound like it has to be that the proposed solution should seem viable. Although often, to be honest, right, that the solution that ends up winning isn't that close to the solution you get pitched by an early stage startup. Canva is a big exception. They really built exactly what they said they were going to build, and it really worked. But overwhelmingly, more than anything, and you know this already, I'm going to say this, right, it's about the founders. And in fact, the only thing I have, I mentioned this already, remotely akin to a theory of investing, is that I maintain a list of people that I have worked closely with, mostly at Google and Facebook, but also in other startup environment, right? That I've worked closely enough with them that I know for certain that they are like world-class, kick-ass, crazy people, and basically almost anything that they will be part of founding, if I get a chance to invest, I will invest, right? And so those two guys that I helped Melanie recruit out of Google were on that list. Several other, there's this company in Australia called Nira that's approaching unicorn status now. They build digital twin software for the utility industry, right? So if you happen to run a power utility and you need to design new power lines, I can hook you up with some good software. And that's what we look for, right? And it's hard. I wish I had. I try sometimes this exercise. Like I look back at my 100 investments, right, and I try to only remember what I knew about the startup at the time that I invested, right? And so if I only knew that about each startup, plus all the experience I believe I've gathered in now 15 years of this, right, could I better predict which of them would be a success? And I have to be honest that the answer is no. I have not really learned anything. I mean, that sounded wrong. You know, like, but I did, you know, my investment is as good as it gets, I think, in terms of identifying those founders. I don't, by the way, always get a chance to invest, right? So like the guy who joined when we sold Maps, one of the two guys who joined, he became the PM of Google Maps. His name is Brett Taylor, and so we worked together on Google Maps, right? He's on the list, but I don't get a chance to invest, right? Because he's so good that if he just like sneezes that it sounds like I'm founding a startup, there's like 100 million check waiting for him the next day. And then it's like, there's no room for my little 100K check, right? So like he left Google, he started a company called FriendFeed. He sold it to Facebook. He became Facebook CTO, and that's how I ended up at Facebook. He called me up. He was a CTO, right? And then and at some point he confided me, you know, like he was so bored just being the CTO of Facebook. It's like nothing is happening. So he left, started another company, sold to Salesforce, became the co-CEO of Salesforce. And then he had a side gig as Twitter's board president. And so when all that fun stuff happened between Musk and Twitter, should he buy it, should he not buy it, that was my friend Brett duking it out with Elon, right? And then so now he left, and now he's running a $10 billion company called Sierra. They do customer support agents with AI, right? And he also has a side gig as the chairman of the board of OpenAI. Have you guys heard of OpenAI? Anyway, it's like, there are days I think if I'd stayed in Silicon Valley, could I be the chair of the board of OpenAI? Probably not, but I'm having a lot of fun in this part of the world. That was a way too long answer to a brilliant question. Next, I'll try and be...
Thank you for the presentation. It's just yesterday we were talking about one of the common failures for startups, which was the founders losing confidence and the founders losing ambition. So when, in your personal case, when you started and you had all these difficulties and all, how did you manage to maintain ambition very high and be completely confident over those challenging periods?
Yeah, okay, that's a super good question. And so, you know, there's a theory that people who have been through hardship, maybe even traumatic experiences, they often do better at entrepreneurship. And I think there could possibly be some truth to this. Like there's this thing with when you have a chip on your shoulder that you are so determined to kind of prove yourself, that's a powerful driver in the face of this roller coaster ride of doom and all this stuff. And I don't know if this is something you're like born with or it's based on the experiences you've had growing up and so on. But there are some mind tricks I think you can play, like the fear of failure. It's a huge driver of us, right? And most people, I think, the fear of failure turns into not trying. Right, like most people, they don't try because they would rather not try than trying and failing. And so if you can like position yourself so that you use the fear of failure to just like work your ass off, right? That works better. And I think you can actually like, sometimes it's not a mind trick. It's like if you're conscious about this, you can organize the environment around you so that you no longer have the option of not trying. It's stressful, right? But like you can really make it so that it's more painful not to try than to try and fail. And so that's kind of what I'm doing with Panasthenia, because there are parts of me who's like, you know, I've been at this for a long time. I'm kind of old. I have enough money now. I have a 9-year-old. Maybe I should just retire, right? And so, but then I told everyone that Panasthenia is going to be the biggest innovation festival in the world. And if I stop trying, that's going to be really painful, right? And so there. I will say this, actually, Dimitar, you hear, I had this great drive here, 3 hours from Sofia, right? And we talked, and he asked, you know, what's your number one advice to entrepreneurs, right? And, oh, there you are. And I'm like, look, my number one advice also to myself is that most people, almost everyone, can do much more than they think they can do. Right then, and like if you imagine all the problems you could possibly solve in the world, you stack rank them according to how difficult they are for you. At the bottom are the things that you're super confident you will succeed at. Typically things you've done before or things close to stuff you've done before, right? And that's your comfort zone. And most people, let's be honest, never ever move outside the comfort zone. But I have learned over and over and over from myself and from observing others that there is actually quite a lot of stuff that you can do that you don't know if you can do. And somewhere way, way, way up here, there is a line between the stuff you actually could do if you really tried versus the stuff that you will fail at, like Google Wave, right, if you try. You don't, of course, know by definition where that line is, right? But the trick of life, if you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, is to try and operate right below that line, which, of course, will have the side effect that the line gets moved way, way up. But you have to be okay with the fact that you're going to get that wrong and you're going to fail. And I have done that tons, and it hurts like hell. And it's not like I think we should celebrate failure in any way, shape, or form. But I do think we should celebrate people being willing to try. And then don't celebrate the failure, but definitely celebrate people who are willing to try again after a painful failure. And in fact, I think you'll see a lot of really big successes come out of people who've been through painful failure before. And then people ask, well, how do you like progress with confidence? I guess this was kind of the root of your question. How do you have confidence when you're trying to attack a problem that you really truly don't know if you can solve? And I think that confidence should come from being okay with failing. Like you cannot have confidence that like I know I'm going to succeed, because you don't, right? But you should have confidence that you know that the world will not end if you fail, that you can recover, you can learn, you can do better afterwards. And it's okay. And that's also sort of, you know, when we look at ecosystems, I think the amount of acceptance that comes from the environment around you, if you fail and you're willing to try again, right? So like in more traditional, I think both Greece and Denmark was like this until recently. If you had a business failure, you were barred by law from trying again. Right, you really got like sanctions. This person went through a bankruptcy, so they're not allowed again, right? And that's kind of like a legal representation of an environment of not being very accepting of the idea that trying and failing and trying again really is part of changing the world. I promised you a brief answer, and now look at me.
A nice perspective, though, so thank you. Other questions? Dani.
Yeah, I hope this can get a short answer, but you said it's very important to find your Frank, and I think you didn't explain how you found yours. He was on the board.
Yeah, well, you just keep pitching.
Before...
You know, you keep pitching until you find your Frank. I mean, and obviously you try to guess who might be interested, right? But you have to go through a bunch of no's. And we went through a bunch of no's before we found, like, he was not the first that we tried this with. And by the way, for me personally, you know, I have all my insecurities, right? Like one of the literally the hardest things about being an entrepreneur is the number of times you have to pitch and get turned down by someone that you really want to say yes to you. Like that's like emotionally draining like nothing else. I gave you a short answer.
Gabi, I'm coming.
also about Frank, how important is the ecosystem? Namely, being there in the valley, if you want to grow in the first stages. You think it's feasible to also be connected with the valley, but not being there like a long term? So, I mean, I know it's been always like this vision of you have to be in the valley, especially pre-pandemic. How about nowadays, post-pandemic? Do you think it's...
Yes, super good question.
Mandatory.
And that's actually why I'm wearing the Canva t-shirt, right? Because they did not go to the valley. They actually did move from Perth to Sydney, but not from Sydney to Silicon Valley. Despite the fact that almost their entire first round, not the whole thing, but most of the first round came from Silicon Valley angels that they met in this kite surfing circuit. And she actually Mel personally spent a lot of time physically in the valley pitching. And you know, they're young, they don't have kids. Now they do, they're married now, they have a kid, but they could have. And if you want to hear their whole story, by the way, that was exactly what I wanted to get out when we invited them to Panathenea. Why did you decide not to go to Silicon Valley? We actually had this tagline of changing the world from your hometown. And you should go watch it. So it's on YouTube. Just look for Panathenea, and you will see Mel and Cliff and me talking about that exact issue. And I think on balance, the following is true: that in any major city that has 1 or 2 world-class universities, you can build a Canva-sized startup. And I think Sofia easily qualifies. Athens easily qualifies. And I think in both of these ecosystems by now, right? So like there are many active VCs, there's lots of people who've had these experiences from abroad that have come back, your neighboring country, all this stuff that I think it's true for your ecosystem and for Athens' ecosystem that the biggest missing ingredients to build like a world-changing, industry-disrupting, Canva-sized startup is mentality. Right, it's that undying pathological. Of course, we can build something from here, and I'm hoping that the first, maybe even the first such like 50 billion startup is sitting in the room right now, and I've probably missed investing in them, which is a bummer. But the flip side of that is that if you're a young entrepreneur and you have some connections in the valley. And in particular, in this crazy time of the AI revolution, you probably have a bigger chance of success if you do move to Silicon Valley. And so there's a dichotomy here. There's the I think it's 100% possible to do here, but it might still be easier to do in Silicon Valley. And the other conversation I'd love to have at Panathenea is how can we fix that? Right? How can we make it so that you're just as likely to succeed here as you are in Silicon Valley? But for Mel and Cliff, so you should see their answer, right? They were just like, look, we could, and here are the pros, and here are the cons, right? So there were enough engineers and a lot less competition for engineers in Sydney than there was in Silicon Valley when they started, right? And they managed, in fact, and you should see it because they get into quite a lot of details, right? That they managed to keep connections there, in particular through their investors. Canva is actually, I don't know how the legal landscape is here, but Canva is actually incorporated in the US. So it's a C Corp in Delaware with an Australian subsidiary. And that helped them a lot in the beginning. Now it's giving them a lot of friction because the Australian government is giving them, they're not very happy with this. Yes.
Lars, I have a question about the ecosystem. It's a little bit of provocation to what you have started with Panathenea. But probably 15 years ago, there is a lot of energy we could feel because it was just emerging all the ecosystems here in the region. And there was this kind of natural, naive in a way, enthusiasm to collaborate and build things together. But over the years, there is a counter effort of more fragmentation. So actually now the biggest challenge that we see is how you make people collaborate and actually look at this place as one ecosystem. Because all these small hubs, although they're they're quite vibrant. They're very small, limited resources, and all of that limits the chances of success for the founders that are there. So what is your take on that? How you could actually make people collaborate more, or actually start thinking about one place rather than just cutting it and dividing it into smaller and smaller pieces?
You know, look, it's hard, right? And I see this even inside of Greece, right? Which is what a 10 million person company, Athens, 4 million people, right? And even if you just look at events, right? Events are not that important. I think events can play a super important role, and I'm spending a lot of time on Panathenea just because it just so happens that the ecosystem I'm in Athens has this unique potential that no one else has. But I did see, you know, before that, there was a lot of different events and a lot of different factions within the ecosystems aligned, sometimes even with politics, you know, like every country has a sort of a right-leaning and a sort of left-leaning, but then I think you put something like Panathenea in front of an ecosystem like this, and you're like, instead of having these small events that compete with each other during the year, why don't we all gang up together and build a big event that competes with Web Summit and South by and so on? And that actually worked, at least in year one. Like, we'll see how this played out, but it was, I think, really the first time that all the ecosystem of Athens really ganged up together and worked towards this common goal. And I'm hoping that as Panathenea really grows and becomes a force in the world, right, that this will extend to the region, right? And I know this might be painful because there are actually really good events in this region, right? Here and in Romania and in Cyprus have really good events sort of at a 10,000 person size, but I think they have kind of reached the limit of what those ecosystems are capable of producing, because they don't happen to have this Panathenea treasure, they don't happen to have this this hospitality industry, right? But we can all gang up on Panathenea and make this the region's international festival. I think something quite magic can come out of it.
One last question? No? Thank you very much, Lars, for sharing your wisdom with us. Thanks indeed.